Well, this is John Sarver from GLREA, and welcome to this Thursday evening Zoom. And I'd like to thank first our sponsors, the State Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, EGLE, and also McNaught and McKay. Thank you, Mark Furta. He's with us tonight. And Harvest Solar is also one of our sponsors. And if you don't already belong to GLREA, I got to put in a commercial here. Please join. You can join online at our website, www.glrea.org. And we got some interesting programs coming up. Next week, we're going to have Tammy Black and Brandon Knight talk about a neighborhood project in Detroit. The week after, November 11th, John Richter, who's our kind of senior policy analyst at the GLREA, is going to talk about solar policy in Michigan. He's one of our main witnesses in our interventions in the Public Service Commission. And then on November 18th, Missy Stoltz from the city of Ann Arbor is going to talk about their new proposal to do a sustainable energy utility, which will be very interesting. But tonight we have Forrest Cohn and Jim Maskill from Utopian Power. They're working with the State Department of Natural Resources on a very interesting, pretty good sized project, a power purchase agreement project that's going to involve 850 kilowatts at 7 different DNR facilities. And so with that, let me turn it over to Forrest and Jim, and let's hear about your work with DNR.
Great. I'm going to pull up that.
Yeah, we'll get it going in a second. We got to introduce ourselves first, but thanks, John, for the introduction. I think we know quite a few folks on the line here. A lot of the folks on here are already familiar with the project as we've talked to them about it and have plans to work together on it. So appreciate everyone coming on and listening to our solar story tonight. And we got a little presentation we'll pull up. So I'll begin sharing my screen.
And we'd like this to be a free-flowing conversation. So if anyone has a question throughout the presentation, please feel free to stop us, interrupt us. We're willing to answer any questions. We'll also leave enough time at the end so we can stick around. We can answer any questions at that time as well if there's anything that pops up that you don't get to introduce or ask during the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jim, you want to lead
Yeah.
us off?
So this is like we just said. My name is James Maskill. This is Forrest. We started Utopian Power over a year ago now. With the kind of both had the passion and joy of renewable energy. So it's kind of a focus of ours, something that we both enjoyed. Forrest spent a handful of years in the solar industry, and I have an extensive background in construction. So we formed this team and kind of paired very nicely together, and learning a lot along the way, and bringing the knowledge that we have had to kind of move forward. We're focusing. We kind of continue to evolve as we grow. We've been focusing on municipalities, commercial projects, kind of utility scale. So larger projects, non-residential. We have done a few smaller residentials, and we'll probably continue to do a few more, but that hasn't been our focus. Forrest kind of introduce himself again.
Yeah. So as Jim mentioned, we're just over a year old now, based in Michigan, out of Michigan. We've been working on projects across the nation over the last year. From Alaska, we've been on a little bit of stuff in Hawaii, over to Virginia. We spent quite a bit of time in Virginia last year, working on some different projects, all around the 3 megawatt range. We worked with a handful of partners across the solar industry so far to really bring some historical solar knowledge, capital, and that sort of thing to projects as we've looked at them. Our focus in the last year has been in Michigan where possible, and then outside of state as opportunities presented themselves. And we're focused on really a Michigan out approach, starting in Michigan and working out. So, however, if we have projects out of the state, we try to keep those projects as local as possible. As you'll see, our business model for this project is as well. So, Jim mentioned our backgrounds are not necessarily in solar for our entire careers, but we've been in and around it I've been in solar type projects for the last 10 years at least. We used to work in manufacturing, working on energy efficiency projects, got a master's degree focused in renewable and sustainable energy from University of Colorado Boulder. And then Mr. John Kinch mentioned that he's looking at Grand Valley's program and doing something similar. And what they're doing in MBA type style, engineering management degree similar to MBA out there, John. And you just take a handful of classes focused in it, and it really brings in the business model of renewable energy, the management side of things, and then where it's applicable, not necessarily, deep into the technologies, but a little bit of a side point there. But anyways.
Utopian Power is a clean energy development company focused on providing a localized solution that fits the needs of our customers and their communities. Our mission statement is accelerating renewable energy adoption by providing responsible energy options to communities, be they individuals, businesses, cities, regions, or the world.
Yeah, and part of our mission there, kind of key word is the communities portion of it. Oftentimes people think of community as something right in front of you, within 5, 10, 15 miles. And while that's certainly true, there's really no end to where community stops regionally or geographically across the world. So, if you're working on something to accomplish something at a community level, it starts there. But, the world's community, if renewable energy is not adopted across the globe, across, county lines, state lines, and then into national lines, then, you're really not going to accomplish where you need to be to get to the point everyone wants to get to on this call.
Here's a couple of examples of our recent projects. These are both Michigan projects, so we selected these. The first one was the partnership, the pilot program with the DNR up at Emmett County. It's the Odin State Fish Hatchery. It was an 8 kilowatt project that serves the visitor center. We completed this project back in 22 in a partnership with the state there. And then more recently, we worked at a school, the Pellston Public Schools, elementary school that services, there's 2 arrays there. They feed the hoop house, which is behind it. They have a gardening program there, as well as the elementary school. That was a pretty unique project as the funding was raised or started through the students. So there was a student group organization that started fundraising for the project. They did a pop can drive. I believe they raised about $5,000. The school matched that donation, and they had an outside anonymous donor who paid for the rest of the array.
Yep. So as Jim mentioned, that we brought power out. It does tie back into the school and has some interconnection with consumers. But it also have power running off the array towards the hoop house there. So they got some plugins and some power at the hoop house now as well. So that's Jim standing in front of it earlier this summer. So, and both of these, ironically, are up in Emmett County. So, where kind of how we got to this project, while these things didn't necessarily go in chronological order, the DNR working on these projects, it's been in works for quite some time, but we wanted to touch on some of what is driving the state of Michigan, some of the urgency within Michigan, and really where this project's coming from at the end of the day is from the governor's level, from the state level. So this previous Earth Day, while this project was already kind of in motion, Governor Gretchen Whitmer announced that all state facilities have a goal of 100% renewables by 2025. And while there's certainly some other mechanisms to get there, other than just physically having solar or another source on the buildings themselves, they'll certainly be a part of that. And 2025 is coming right up. But previous to that, there was an executive directive that set a Michigan goal of complete decarbonization by 2050. So between those two things, there's going to be quite a bit of a push at state level on projects like this. We mentioned here that the DNR is leading the pack. They got the pilot program in. Previously, they bid out some other projects at various hatcheries. And now they have this portfolio of projects as well as some additional plans. So we did throw a large quote, long quote down on the bottom of this slide, and I guess I'll just read it out. But this was a quote that was in a press release about the project. And so it says, "This agreement is in line with our commitment at the state level to strategically deploy solar power across state-owned land where it makes sense, to pursue clean energy solutions that protect public health, boost efficiency, and make us more effective stewards of our natural environment." says Governor Gretchen Whitmer. The project also demonstrates how a move towards renewable energy creates investments in local communities and good paying jobs. We'll work with anyone who wants to put Michiganders first, help usher in a new era of prosperity for our state by building a clean energy economy that works for everyone. So we'll try to point out a little bit of that today, how this project, we're trying to exemplify that and to hit all those various aspects of benefits to solar here in Michigan.
So this is the specific project that we're working on now. This is the Southwest Michigan DNR solar sites. There's 7 facilities, approximately 20 meters at the facility. So each site has multiple meters. Some of them do, most of them do. They range from recreation areas to state parks, the Plainville Customer Service Center, Fort Custer, Muskegon, PJ Hoffmaster, and Ionia State Recreation Area.
Yeah. So as you can see, they're all Southwest Michigan, within an hour of Grand Rapids for the most part. So
continuing on this project, the total project size is about 820 kilowatts. We're breaking that up into 2 phases. So the first phases will be completed this year. There's smaller ground mounts and roof mount arrays, about 245 kilowatts. And then early next year, pretty much at the end of this year, after those are completed, we'll start working on the phase 2, but those won't be finished until next year. So those are the larger ground mounts. The one picture there on the right, 82 kilowatt at the Ionia campground. We'll kind of go into Ionia a little bit more in depth, but that's one of the larger arrays that we have. And we'll show you the next slide here that feeds.
In phase 1 there. So yeah, all of phase 1 should be mechanically completed in 2021 with some lingering interconnections into next year on that.
So we kind of go in a little depth here with the Ionia Recreation Area. It's one of the sites that has 3 arrays being installed at the facility. And it's kind of, as you pull in the site, you start with the headquarters. So several of the headquarters in this portfolio will be installed with solar arrays to power the visitor center and the headquarters. And then this specific site, as you kind of drive through further through the park, there's cabin rentals. There's 2 cabins on Sessions Lake, and they will put a small ground mount there to support those 2 cabins. And then further around the park is the large campground. That's the picture we saw previously. It's number 3 on this site. That's a large 81 kilowatt array.
Yeah, we'll show you a little bit of a map on the site here, but you also see we threw in a portion, there's a cutout of a stamp plan there in the middle of the slide just to demonstrate how these ground mounts will be mounted. It's a post-driven system. That's a stamped engineering drawing, State of Michigan drawing, and it's pretty simple, really, the style that we'll be doing there. And I wanted to, you still see my screen here. This is Ionia State Recreation Area. So this is a road, can't remember the name of this road, but right in front of it, as you pull in, there's all these little yellows are solar systems. So this is typical of what this project will look like. And when you pull into the park, you'll see solar on a visitor center or a headquarters, cold storage. Maybe there's an opportunity for a medium-sized system somewhere in the park. And then a lot of the energy usage at these parks are really the campground where people are coming in and plugging in their RVs, So this should demonstrate to some extent where these systems will go. So this is on the south side of headquarters. We tie directly into the meter on the west side of the building. We're actually going to cut down a couple trees along this one, but and this will be tucked up and a little bit away from most of the public eye, because this is just a headquarters building. But you come further into the building or into the park. These are cabins that are rented out quite often in the summertime, and there's this little concrete area here is a standalone meter and electrical. So that's a cabinetry we'll tie into right there. This will be a 13 kW, and it's a single array. It's about 60 feet long, two panels high, 60 feet long. We're using Fronius string inverters on all these ground mounts, and most likely a First Solar 425 watt panel made in Ohio. next spot here. So Jim and I were looking at this earlier. It looked like it's like a Friday after work. There's 6 cars backed up trying to get in the campground. But you can see this campground back here. There's a lot of different campsites, and some of them are even bigger than this. So this 80 kW is one of the smaller campground arrays. A lot of these campground meters are 1600 amp service, is a really big service that's feeding all of these campgrounds, sorry, not campground, but campsites with a pretty significant load. You can see all that. It's almost like a little, little subdivision type deal. So here there's a flat spot that we'll be putting an 81 kW solar array. So we just kind of wanted to give an oversight of what that park looks like, and as an example of what these systems for the most part are designed to meet the need of what the park is. So jump back into this, and I guess I'll go back one real quick. This solar array on the right here, you'll see that it says 282 feet to the tie-in. So what we're going to do is directionally bore to that location from the solar array, and one of the reasons this even is a little bit bigger system, we're having it in phase 1, is because this 300 feet of boring is rather short for the project. A lot of these solar arrays, since they are at a state park and we do not want to interfere with the experience at the park, are quite far away. So 900 1,000 feet underneath the campgrounds where there's other utilities and that sort of thing. So that's taken a little bit of planning to make sure we can hit those runs. So wanted to jump into some of the impacts to Michigan from this project. Well, this slide just isn't super in detail. We wanted to show, hey, it's about as designed right now, 830 kW. That portion has kind of gone up and down a little bit as we've ironed out the size of the systems, but roughly 850 kW, and that's going to create about, was it 1 million mega? 100,000. I should know that. I just did this recently, but about 100,000 kilowatt hours, I think. Maybe a little more than that. Anyways, this would be the offsets of those in a carbon manner and CO2 manner. So, enough to basically take off 154 passenger vehicles, gas-driven vehicles off the road, which I think is a big, a pretty eye-opening stat there. So some of the economic impacts of this project to Michigan. The governor mentioned in that quote that she's trying to do business and wants to do business with people that are putting Michiganders first. So this entire project, I think from inception, the state, consultants with the state, through us, contractors we have working on the project, the bank itself, the racking is made in Albion, Michigan. We have Michigan financed entirely from a debt standpoint, where you're actually taking debt from a Michigan bank. And then we have private debt equity as well that comes in to utilize that 26% tax credit. So there's a combination of those two things working to get the thing financed. Overall, the over $2 million capital investment that will take to get this project up, finalized, and making power is going to be directly back into the Michigan economy. So, it's at the end of the day, it's also saving the state of Michigan about $1.4 million over the course of 25 years. So the system in the long run will be owned and operated by Utopian Power, Jim and I, as well as another partner with the tax debt equity combination there. So we maintain long-term ownership, and allows us to keep all of this within Michigan. So to go into the financing a little bit more on how this was set up, it's a power purchase agreement, 25-year terms. We are working with the state for 25 years through an operational. Basically, we have rights to the space we have more or less leased at the state parks, where we can operate and sell the state power. So we will be responsible for maintenance, long-term upkeep, changing out parts as needed, long-term maintenance. The tax equity portion is mentioned here as well, the 26%. And again, there's no hard construction cost to the state to get this done. So of course there's time and energy and all of that that's gone in on the state side of things to get it done. But generally speaking, we will be bringing the capital to the table to get the project done. And then there's a little diagram at the bottom of the page there, kind of demonstrating, if you're not familiar with a PPA, on what that is. You know, that there's a solar system that's feeding a customer is buying power to the project and the investor, and that's funding the solar system. So I guess it starts with the project investor, but you know, it's more or less a circle there. So if there's any questions at this time, feel free to jump in, or we'll continue on.
I've got a question.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hi, Harvey.
Can you go back to the slide with the little cars on it?
Yes.
Okay, so I have no idea what I'm looking at. And
all right.
At the top, I see 154 gas emission. Are you talking about CO2?
So the measurement on strictly CO2 is below that in that secondary. And this is actually this picture, this calculation is from EPA's website, and I can share a link on access, and that it's an interesting way to take a look at it. But strictly CO2 emissions, that second portion there is what's being represented, and then overall greenhouse gas emissions is in that top two boxes there.
All right, so I just want to take it one step at a time so I can actually understand what you're presenting. I see 154 something, and then I see 1.7 million something. What are we talking about here?
So those are ORs. So this solar system is equivalent to saving 154 passenger vehicles driven for 1 year. So it's equivalent to. So the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we are eliminating by using solar instead of the grid is saving that much greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay.
It's equivalent to.
Yeah, and then below those, the larger numbers there, the 154, it says passenger vehicles driven for 1 year, or miles driven by an average passenger vehicle. So it's got a little bit of detail underneath that, but maybe hard to see.
It's just kind of an example of the system that we're designing and what it replaces, or what it's equivalent to, what it's replacing.
Okay, that wasn't clear to me, so I got it now. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an interesting. I said this is an EPA available through the EPA. It's an interesting thing I like to include in a lot of our slides on just trying to get folks something that you can relate to. So the last one there is 86 million number of smartphones charged, and we presented to the Pellston School District earlier this year, and we were focused on that one because all the kids, like we're saying, hey, look, you can charge your phone, 86 million times off of this in an average year. So this is a yearly production calculation in here. So
I have a question.
Yeah.
Jay Nugent, Ypsilanti. A lot of folks will go and see these solar panels and will have just the opposite reaction to going green. We all know there are folks out there that are the naysayers. What I would hope is maybe you consider planting bee and butterfly friendly flowers and milkweed all around and under the solar panels, so that it's also something that's good for the environment, that's immediately understandable by most people who at least understand the ecosystem. Are you considering doing bee and butterfly friendly and milkweed plantings in and around the solar arrays?
Yeah, Jim could answer this a little bit more than I can. He's looked into the pollinator requirements a little bit more than I have, but I don't know that we necessarily thought about milkweed, but I think that's certainly a good idea given the
reason I suggest
benefits of it.
The reason I
Butterflies.
suggest milkweed, of course, is because of the monarchs. We have a drastic reduction in monarchs, and they definitely need milkweed in order to survive. And I think folks go and chop it down because it has the word weed in it, but it really is helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay.
No, Jay, I think to your point on besides the things you mentioned there, step back a bit, is that certainly we're doing this at state parks, right? So it's a location that folks are going to see green. They're going to see trees and grass and leaves and as natural of an environment as possible, right? So we're not deaf to the fact that there's going to be some folks who see this in a state park, especially like a ground mount. We had to cut a couple trees down as a negative, right? So we're doing everything we can to reduce the impact where possible. The state was very conscientious of that as well as this was set up. So I think your point's well taken there, that we will be doing some of the revegetation in a responsible manner wherever it makes sense. So there's some locations I don't think we can necessarily but across the board, we are going to try to do that.
Mindy, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Will EV charging stations be included at any of these parks as part of the project?
Not part of this project, no. It is something that I don't know how much the DNR is considering it. We talked about it specifically this project, and it wasn't feasible at this time. But it is something that the DNR is continuing, and probably more than I know the rest of Michigan is continuing to look into.
Okay, thanks.
This is Chuck Allen. I'm an analyst with the DNR, working with Forrest and Jim on this, and I don't want to take a lot of their time, but I can answer a little bit of that.
Please, Chuck.
We are working with a nonprofit called Adoptive Charger and a electric vehicle manufacturer to install EV charging stations at several state parks. And some of the state parks in this particular Southwest portfolio are going to also get EV charging stations. So yes, there will be.
Great. Thanks, Chuck. Appreciate that.
Great, thank you.
All righty, we'll continue on here a little bit more. All right, so I talked about this already. So I guess we're kind of going to move off the project a little bit and speak to where else this type of project would be applicable in Michigan.
Specifically the PPA, so the power purchase agreement.
A larger project where, specifically PPA, but there's some more questions on the project before we get into this. We only got a couple more slides. I guess we can shoot through them, but we just wanted to mention that, this type of project, where else is it applicable? Where you have outside financing, private financing, debt equity that's coming to the table to pay for the capital requirements and allow for sometimes earlier adoption in solar in communities that are communities that can't necessarily, or it makes sense for that type of setup. You're not necessarily can't afford it, but it makes sense for that type of setup. So, or they can't use a tax equity. So a school or many municipalities don't have the appetite for tax equity because they're not necessarily paying those taxes. So by allowing outside ownership and equity, you allow for, I guess, a cheaper solar system and a little bit easier adoption. So the cost of power comes down. So that's a very typical setup for many schools, municipalities, and churches and that type of thing. So now in Michigan specifically, there's also some community solar legislation that's coming down the pipe that will probably be financed in a similar manner.
I think a key to the PPA, going back to that for a second, is there's no out-of-pocket for the end user. They guarantee a cheaper utility rate than they're paying today and over the long haul as well. So there's nothing out of their pocket to develop it, and they get cheaper power from day one. So as soon as it's permission to operate.
Yeah, and I guess that we should mention that as well. So the PPA, the agreement there is a rate that is lower than what consumers is willing. It's a consumer's rate. So that's the outside of the green and environmental aspects of it. That's another reason for the state or an off-taker to do this type of project. So in conclusion, we believe the responsibility starts, and we appreciate the state working with us to get this done, but the responsibility starts within our own communities in the state, right? So Michigan is a leader in environmental and pushes the envelope fairly often and new changes, especially compared to other places in the Midwest, and they continue to do that. So, Michigan is committed to adding more renewable power across the board. And that is also our goal here locally in our communities. So there's a couple other comments in here that, local opportunity for global impact starts with us, and that any other opportunities or partnerships, we'd love to be involved if there's anything like that. So we wanted to just say thank you to the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association for having us on. We are members of the association, and thank you very much.
Hey, thank you guys. And why don't you stop the screen sharing so we can kind of see the folks who will be asking questions. Sure. We've got a good 25 minutes for questions. Let me start off. I'm kind of curious, approximately what percentage of the power that's used at these different types of DNR facilities is now being provided by the solar? Is it, 25%, 50%, 80%, approximately?
Yeah, so each and every meter that we're tying into, it's designed to almost 100%. So the annual usage is X, we're pretty much hitting it right on. So where space allows, and so where space allows, there's some physical constraints, but where possible, the goal is 100%.
Sounds good. Dale, go ahead.
How do you work? These are not net metered meters, or are these distributed generation? So there's a different rate, inflow, outflow. How do you handle that?
Yeah, there'll be some difference in the inflow and outflow in distributed generation.
So as you are, how do you get paid? Like if your system overproduces, like there'll be a sunny day that there's not a lot of campers in the campground running the air conditioners, and you'll have a lot of net outflow, and you get less than, way less than the retail rate for that onto their meter. And then they use that credit back up later. How do you get compensated exactly?
Yeah, so our agreement with the state is deliver power at a fixed rate. And then the state is working within the fluctuating cost.
Well, that must mean that you took into account in some way what the bill credits would be, so that the state of Michigan will end up saving money. Obviously, right? You had to do some sort of calculation, get an idea of how much you'd be exporting and how much you'd be using on site.
Correct. Yeah. So, over the course of a year, we're looking to hit closer to the 100%, but there is the inflow outflow difference. And I guess it's kind of an in-depth calculation, but yeah, we looked at, the averages and which wind power is being used. The large majority of these sites use more power in the summertime when the state parks are busy. That's when you're making more power. So the majority of the power will meet, the higher value compared to the lower value there.
Yeah, and I should mention for folks, what's easiest is if you go under reactions, there's a raise your hand function, which will make it easier for me to kind of see who has questions. Another question I've got though are the panels tilted at all, seasonal tilting? I assume you didn't do tracking because the economics weren't good, and what about batteries? Were any of those kind of considered?
I'm sorry, John.
I got you. I got it. So on the battery side of things, batteries were certainly considered, especially at a specific site. We were looking at batteries in order to allow for peak shaving. So where you're being charged on a higher demand charge, you can actually reduce those peaks by having a battery discharge during that period of time. So over a monthly span, you will reduce the overall cost of your bill, but often in a significant manner. So we did look at that back and forth with the state quite a bit. And at the end of the day, the economics weren't there to support a battery in a large scale, fairly large scale at one of these sites. So at this time, there will be no batteries involved. You can always add batteries at a later date without a problem. So at this point, no batteries. And then, John, the other portion of your question is as far as tilt and tracking.
Is there any seasonal tilting, changing the tilt by season, and was tracking considered at all?
Yeah, tracking was definitely considered, but again, going back to the economics, it didn't make sense. We weren't restricted by land, so that was kind of one thing that we were looking at. And some of the tighter projects we've done in the past, we use tracking because the land is tighter, so we get a better output as the array or the panels track the sun throughout the day. This one, it didn't make sense for us. Obviously, the roofs are fixed, and we did fixed mount on all ground mounts as well.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Mindy, go ahead.
Mindy, we can't hear you.
I thought I unmuted.
There you go.
Is vandalism an issue at all? And if so, do you fence it in, or what are you doing to prevent vandalism?
We hope it's not an issue, but yeah, all state parks will be fenced in. There are a few that are at the headquarters. I don't believe any of the headquarters are fenced in.
Yeah, I mean, the fencing, we don't think that it will necessarily be a big issue at the state parks. It could be, of course, but to Jim's point there, some of the areas where there's not very high traffic, we're not necessarily fencing them in. So the state is definitely interested in keeping some separation from the systems to the park goers, but it's not, we're thinking more on the safety front compared to the vandalism front.
So just so probably about half of them are fenced in, the ground mounts.
Yeah, where there's easy access to them, they're fenced in. They will be fenced in.
Dale, do you have another question?
Yeah, I was still curious more about how the billing and the metering works. Do you effectively take over the meter for a certain location, and you deal with the utility as far as how much credit you've outflowed, and then the customer, the state park, pays you based on how much you actually delivered to them, regardless of when they used it?
Yeah, sort of. The second portion there, we said, what we deliver to the state parks will be what is paid for to us. And that kind of, the reason for that is it will get very confusing beyond that, right? So we will be installing revenue grade metering on every single one of these systems. And that's not real common on an 8 kW system, but that's the way this will be set up, right? So every system will be metered and billed for accountingly on what is actually delivered. So the intent is to align the production with the higher value solar credit, as you're talking there. But in the case that it's not, the state parks will still carry a bill with consumers.
And so are the parks, these are pretty big setups. Are these on time of use, or you mentioned demand charge? Are they on a demand rate?
These ones actually are not on a demand rate. That was a different site that was pulled off due to the fact that the demand rate, we couldn't compete with the cost of that power. So the savings there was in the batteries, in the peak shaving. And so that particular project was pulled off the portfolio. So these are all like pretty much, I think they're the category, not category 2, but
1 and 2.
Category 1 and 2 size wise for interconnection, but the billing rate is just above basically just above residential. So, they're not huge. We're not feeding every meter in the park either, so there's pretty specific meters that will be fed.
Other questions from folks? Just raise your hand or unmute yourself. Deborah?
I had a question about maybe perhaps I'm a teacher, so I was thinking that this is going to be a real good way for our youth and everyone to learn about solar and its importance and how positive it is. Have you considered, or is there part of the project that includes some kind of a label that says this is what it is in a very simple layperson's term, and how Michigan is supporting this and how it's saving and how it's helping to keep our communities green?
Yeah, sure. I can, if Chuck wants to answer that too, we can, but the state, we are not responsible for the signage. The state is planning on it and has kind of stated that that's something they'll take on. So within their own branding, their own informative signage. So we will not be, but that is part of the plan.
Yeah, this is Chuck. Yeah, actually, that was one of the real focuses for us when we started this whole process. Is we looked at it as, we know we're not going to save a ton of money in this. Over the long haul, yes, we'll save money, but we really looked at it in a different way. We wanted to provide education, which is one of our strong missions with the DNR, and we wanted to be leaders in the renewable energy industry. So yes, we are going to have educational kiosks and signage around these arrays, at least the ones where there's public access, so that we can really explain the story of this. And then we're also going to have a QR code on the sign, so that you can just hit that QR code and it can take you to various sites that can really explain better about renewable energy and what we're doing, and potentially even what that array is actually doing at the time, so that they can get a real-time feel for what's going on there. So yep, that's a big part of it.
I think that's a really good idea. I mentioned that I'm a teacher, and we're using QR codes every day to go to the bathroom. They use a QR code to order lunch. They use a different QR code. Go see the counselor. They use a different QR code. Students know that. They know how to do it. And I think what we're doing by putting those signs up is allowing youth to think about future careers. And they're seeing, wow, look, it's here and it's part of where I live and it's valued. So thank you very much for your collaboration with Utopian Power. I think that's awesome.
Absolutely. And another aspect of this will be, we have a program within our state parks called the Explorer Guide program. And basically what it is it's a interpreter in our park that gives programs, and they give nature-based programs. Well, part of their programming now will be renewable energy programs as well. So they'll actually take people from the park out to the arrays and talk about the arrays and renewable energy and all the different things that we're doing. So this is a great collaboration, I think, between us and Utopia.
I wonder too if one of you could give us an idea of where DNR is heading. I think this was there was some pilot projects, but then this is a fairly good sized project, obviously. And I believe other projects are going to be bid out. Can anybody kind of give us a kind of where we're going sort of overview?
Sure, I can do that. We are currently working on a northern portfolio as well, which would incorporate not just state parks, but other state facilities as well. We have a lot of locations that are wildlife division offices, forest resource division offices, things like that, in addition to state parks. So we're collecting the data right now on those facilities, so that we can get an RFP put together and put that out as well, just like we did with the Southwest portfolio. And then once the Northern portfolio we get that going, we're moving on to the Southeast Michigan portfolio, and then we'll be moving on to the Upper Peninsula portfolio. So we're hoping to have the RFP for the North out sometime, hopefully by the end of this year. And then if we can, it would be early in 2022, so that we can see it by fall of 2022, at least in the North, and then we'll head, like I said, to Southeast Michigan. Yeah, so we're looking at the entire state, but it's a tough thing because in a state park, the best thing about a state park is the wilderness, right? There's lots of trees and things like that. So trying to find good locations for solar is tough. We did pretty well in the Southwest, and I think we'll do real well in the Southeast. But Northern is proving to be a bit of a difficult area to cover. But we think we'll be able to get a good enough portfolio together for that also.
Well, boy, that sounds great. Other questions for Forrest and Jim and Chuck, or any other questions we got?
Could you guys talk more about how you guys started your company, Utopian, and how long you've been doing this, and what you did before this?
Yeah, sure.
I can start with I'll start kind of my history. I was come from a construction background. So I started my father's construction company probably 15 years ago.
More than that.
When I was in diapers, some would say. I moved to DC and came into property management and did that for almost a decade. While I was there, I got my master's in what was my master's? Construction development, which, believe it or not, is very relevant to what we're doing now. It's just kind of large scale development projects. And then Forrest and I'll let Forrest talk about his background, and we can tell you how we were kind of formed.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, but I went to Michigan State in Michigan. Jim went to Eastern Michigan. We're both from Michigan. We're first cousins. So we know each other our entire lives. But I went to University of Colorado Boulder. I was living in Colorado for a number of years. I was living in Alaska as well over the last handful of years. And now we're both back in Michigan working on this. But, one of my master's projects in my program was to start a business. And I wrote a business plan for something called like Power of the People Solar. And, so since that point in time, I kind of planned on doing that. I was working and had some interesting opportunities for various things between that time and now. But, Jim and I were always talking business back and forth, and we were interested in this. From my point of view, energy, we're using a ton of energy every day. Everyone uses it. You wake up, you start using it. And I think it's kind of a generational problem to solve. And it's something that, I want to be involved with, and that's where my interest in it comes from. But, the formation of this company really has just been through that mindset, I guess, and an opportunity to work together on something that we care about, something that there's a lot of opportunity in right now, something that fits both of our backgrounds. So we're both familiar with construction from a young age. My mom's a teacher, has been talking on there. My dad's sitting next to her. He's a carpenter as well. So both of us grew up doing this kind of stuff from the get-go. So, we're very interested in it. And, from a formation of the company, we are looking at the utility scale, municipality scale, larger solar systems, because there's a lot of residential solar companies out there doing that type of work, which is great work. There's a lot of big solar companies out there doing that type of work, but the intermediate, small, intricate development projects like this one that take a lot of time and a lot of effort, but they're interesting and they're impactful. So that's kind of what we're focused on.
Hey, Forrest, related to kind of starting up a business like this, you know, we keep reading about shortages of labor, workers, and materials. Have that been an issue at all for you guys doing those sort of projects, having the right workers and getting equipment on schedule and stuff?
No, not to this point. We're still in the process of acquiring a lot of our material, but we're getting very positive responses, and we don't expect that to be a problem. As well as labor, we have a lot of labor already lined up and dates ready to go. So we don't expect that to be a problem that we're going to run into. No.
Yes, people are certainly busy right now. The industry is busy. Right now we're working towards the end of the year in Michigan, so the timing on everything is folks are busy. You know, we're doing civil work right now. Coming up will be our first step on this project, so getting stuff ready on the ground. But so we have definitely seen competition in the market for people's time, materials, etc. But generally speaking, we're trying to keep the production of materials as close to home as possible. I mentioned the racking will be coming out of Michigan, made in Michigan. There's a couple of folks on this call we plan on sourcing products from in the city of Detroit. So, you know, we're trying to keep those issues down by buying local, using local, and that's certainly helped. And it also helps that it's a Michigan State Park job, so you can get folks' attention a little bit quicker, right? But
yeah, there was a question in the chat about what the State Department of the Highway Transportation might be doing highways. I don't know if anybody on the Zoom here knows what other state agencies are up to. It sounds like DNR is maybe the leader of the pack.
So, John, I'll grab that. This is John Kinch with Michigan Energy Options. And we've been working with Chuck Allen, DNR, and Forrest and folks in the DNR stuff. We're also working with other agencies around the state to look at the model that DNR is developing and perfecting, then and transferring that to other agencies. So we're working with DTMB, if you recognize that acronym. Department of Corrections, there's possibilities there as well. Department of Transportation. The state of Michigan owns a lot of facilities. They have a lot of property. And we think that putting those into play for the solar industry, working with companies like Jim's and Forrest, working with utilities, is a way to fast track some of the adoption of solar in our state. As some of you may know, oftentimes these projects take a long time to develop because there becomes issues locally with both acquiring the land and then getting the land permitted and zoned locally. And there's any number of things that kind of slow things up and delay things. And our thesis is that by working with something like the state of Michigan and companies like Utopian Power and utilities like Consumers, that we can move it forward more quickly. So we really hope to see a lot more adoption in the next year or two. We've got Utopian leading the way because they did the Odin fish hatchery. They're doing the Southwest Michigan portfolio. Ideally, they're going to do other projects with the DNR, but we really want to see this working like a machine, if you will, to crank out projects in the near future, because frankly, we need to. We can't really dither and dally anymore when it comes to adopting renewables in the state of Michigan and really beginning to reduce our carbon.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks, John.
We've got a few more minutes for a few last questions, if anybody has any. Okay, I don't see any hands raised. Well, Forrest and Jim, thank you very much for the presentation. That was very interesting to kind of see what the state of Michigan is up to, and especially at the different DNR facilities. And it's good to hear that this is probably the first of many, many more projects that are to come. And thank you, everybody, for attending. And again, I'd encourage you to kind of join us next week for a presentation about a Detroit neighborhood project next Thursday at 7 to 8. And Rosalie, I think you have a question. Go ahead.
I didn't have a question. I was putting a clap hand.
Oh, that was a clap hand. Okay. Yeah, I got it. Okay.
Thanks, Rosalie.
Well, I just want to add, appreciate John and Chuck taking the time to get on here as well. John Kinch and Chuck Allen and Mr. Sarver as well. But thanks for taking the time to walk us through this today and help us out with some of those questions. So appreciate it.
Sure. Hey, thanks to everybody. Take care.
Thanks all.